As a brand, Timex are not the horological mainstay in the UK that they are in the US and elsewhere around the world, where you'll find them fairly regularly stocked. They have always fascinated me for that exact reason, because we don't really have a UK equivalent. There are a few pretenders out there, but they pale in comparison when it comes to scale, history, and indeed value for money. As a channel that primarily focuses on the budget end of the market, Timex are a brand that features semi-regularly, but I don't actually know a great deal about them, beyond having enjoyed a number of their watches. If you find yourself in the same position, join me if you will on this retrospective look into the history of the company. With all that said, let's get into the video. Let's begin with the logical starting point, how the company was initially founded. And it doesn't start in a way that you might expect. A man by the name of Aaron Benedict founded a brass manufacturing company in Waterbury, Connecticut in 1812. Initially, manufacturing might have been a very over-glamorized name for what he was actually doing. As the US was now at war with England, they needed to produce their own military uniforms. Aaron saw a gap in the market and set up a rolling mill to produce brass buttons to help in the effort. However, not having access to a steady supply of brass, he was actually buying up kitchenware from the local area to repurpose. In 1870, the company was incorporated into the far larger organization, the American Brass Company, but not before founding an offshoot, the Waterbury Clock Company, in 1854, and it's here where the origins of Timex can be traced back to. You might recognise the Waterbury name, as they still produce a range of watches bearing that moniker. In fact, in November of last year, Timex released a special edition $1 watch limited to 1,000 pieces to mark their 170th year of operation. And it was indeed a Waterbury piece. Almost all of these were immediately snapped up by bots and scalpers, and despite my best efforts, I wasn't able to get one. I don't necessarily mind having missed out given the number available, but my word, it was infuriating seeing them immediately listed on eBay for a several $100 markup moments later. Having been established by a brass manufacturer, it's perhaps unsurprising that the material was heavily utilised in the early pocket watches and clocks that the company produced. Components could be stamped out of sheets of brass, which made production considerably cheaper than rival companies, as well as meaning that parts could be smaller and large parts of the manufacturing process were essentially automated without losing comparative timekeeping accuracy. This set the Waterbury Company apart, as they were able to mass-produce timepieces at comparatively affordable rates, and that is clearly a core component of Timex's business strategy even to this day. Something else that set Timex apart from its competitors was its workforce, with around 40% of staff being women, who were preferred on the assembly line for their smaller hands and fingers, helping them with the delicate construction process. Towards the end of the century, they were actually producing the most watches of any brand in the world, but that did not protect them financially. They actually went bust and ended up working together with another US watch brand, Ingersoll, who, in an odd twist of fate, Timex now own the distribution rights for as of 2018. Together, they released a $1 pocket watch known as the Jumbo, which was named after a tusked member of P.T. Barnum's circus. Yes, the real one on which The Greatest Showman was based. There were quite a few raised eyebrows about his positive depiction in the film, and I think it's probably best not to dwell on that and just say that it's clearly a work of fiction. The Jumbo, however, was a hit. But what really made the Union successful was the Yankee, a watch that became extremely popular for its affordability and availability. At the turn of the century, wristwatches were not really much of a thing. They did exist, but were viewed through the lens of being a women's jewellery piece rather than anything a gentleman would consider wearing. This all changed with the outbreak of World War I, where, as ever, necessity became the mother of invention. Pocket watches were simply not a good time-telling option in warfare. Trying to fumble in a pocket for the time while being shot at, charged at, coordinating an attack, or any other manner of horror you can imagine in trench warfare simply put you at a disadvantage. During the earlier Boer Wars, soldiers had already taken to tying pocket watches around their wrists over their uniforms, so a bespoke wristwatch suddenly started to make a lot of sense. The Waterbury Clock Company were one of the first to adopt production of male wristwatches, and they did so by modifying the midget, a ladies' watch they were in the process of making for Ingersoll at the time. This history of being adapted from ladies' watches and people on average having smaller wrists is one of the reasons why a lot of vintage pieces are very small by modern standards. Despite this success, by the 1930s, like almost everything, the brand was again struggling to stay afloat during the Great Depression. Their saviour came in the form of perhaps the world's most iconic mascot. At the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, the brand displayed the first ever Mickey Mouse themed watch. While there have been many iterations since, one of those original pieces will now run you into thousands of dollars if it's in good working condition. After the outbreak of World War II, a lot of Europeans were displaced to the US by the Nazi occupation of various countries. Two Norwegian men, Thomas Olsen and Joachim Lemkuhl, were amongst their number. They bought the Waterbury Clock Company and decided to rename it. This happened in 1941, and the brand was renamed to the United States Time Corporation. The ambitions of the company once again shifted to a military focus, not just in terms of their watch production output, but producing timers for munitions. This relationship with the military continued throughout World War II and into the Korean War. They actually used this military know-how in their watch business too, using materials used in the manufacturing of munitions as substitutes for watch components to help keep costs down. It was around this time that Timex as a name started to emerge, with the brand targeting department stores for sales rather than jewelers and demanding lower markups than their competitors to help keep costs down. They wanted to make a profit by selling a lot of watches and had a series of TV advertising campaigns featuring a number of stunts and celebrities to demonstrate that these were not just cheap watches but durable and popular too. At this stage, a further history lesson seems somewhat pointless, but let me explain why. As an observer from the outside looking in, it does seem to me that Timex has three prevalent trends going on at the moment. These are collaborations, with artists and Snoopy in particular being prominent ones from recent memory. The second trend sort of stems from that. Collaborations with the James brand making some new titanium GMT models takes the brand more upmarket in terms of their materials, design and price. The final trend, which we can use as a substitute for brand history effectively, is reissues. They have so many now that I think it's actually saturating their offering, and each new reissue feels a little less special than the last. That's my view, but I think that does quite a few of the models a real disservice, as they are actually really deserving of your attention. This video would bloat into an inordinate length if I tried to go through them all, but I will take the time to highlight a few that I'm particularly fond of. The nice thing about this is that although we're talking about the history of the company, actually you can go out and buy these models if you like them, as they're all currently readily available. It should be noted that while I've featured these based on the date order of their original release, that doesn't actually reflect their modern release schedule. The 1971 Velocity is, unlike a lot of the reissues, a single model rather than an entire range. Unlike a lot of those models that are completely faithful one-to-one recreations, this does have one key difference to its racing-inspired ancestor. The new Velocity is quartz powered, whereas the original had an electric movement. I dare say the synthetic rubber strap is also a pretty sizable upgrade and indeed difference, but this does still pack the look and feel of the original, helped out with the period correct domed acrylic crystal. The 1975 Enigma was originally known as the Mystery Dial model. The idea with this design was to create the illusion of a floating set of hands on your wrist. They aim to achieve this with a dot of navy painted on the underside of the dial, covering the central hand hub and giving the impression, at least from a distance, that the hands are indeed floating. The 1979 reissue is perhaps the most famous of the bunch. With its iconic late 70s sports watch design, it was perhaps the most hyped modern affordable watch release until the Moonswatch came along. The modern iteration is an extremely faithful recreation, with the coin edge battery hatch, woven stainless steel bracelet, and pressure sensitive bezel. I've had both the quartz and automatic variants of this watch in my collection and was fond of both models, but I think the quartz is the superior offering. In all honesty, it's far less bulky than its automatic bigger brother. Finally, I'd like to highlight the digital liquid crystal analog models, which harken back to the 1980s. These demonstrate the efforts that Timex made to stay on trend with the spread of digital models, to ensure that they weren't once again driven to bankruptcy, as happened to so many of their contemporaries at the time during the quartz crisis. The LCA models currently available are slightly different though, with translucent resin cases and straps, but they fit perfectly into the retro aesthetic nonetheless. I personally am more interested in the upmarket direction of the brand for their future, and have been sorely tempted to pick up the titanium GMT model, but I think I'll keep my powder dry for a little longer, as Timex are, if nothing else, prolific with their releases. We'll wrap things up there, but if you have any information or experiences to share about the brand, I'd love to discuss these with you in the comments section below. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed what you've seen or found it informative, consider dropping the video a like and subscribing for more content like this in future.